In this video we are going to talk about reading workshop and reading strategies and how kids are motivated to read in the middle school. So if you have not watched the video that is posted on our sessions for this session, session 3, then you should watch that before you listen to the rest of this video lecture, because it really will give you a good overview of what reading workshop really is, and you'll be able to answer that question, what is it? What is reading workshop? So pause me now and go watch that if you haven't. Okay, so if you paused and are back, then you've watched the video, so you should be able to write out a definition of what reading workshop is based on what you saw and based on the reading in the textbook. So reading workshop really is just a way to organize reading instruction to where students have a lot of freedom and choice and independent reading, but they are supported along the way with strategies and discussions with the teacher and whole group lessons, but also small group and independent things. So I think one of the things you need to think about when you're talking about independent reading or kids choosing books, everything to do with reading workshop, you need to think about why you read, because middle school students should start choosing books and reading a lot of things like adults do, because that's really what you're readying them for, is to be able to be a literate person in society. So why do you read? You read for pleasure, you read because you need to do something for class, you read for in order to gather information, you read in order to understand things that are going on. So you have a lot of reasons why you read, but it would be interesting to talk to a middle school student and see why they read. And in our class you will conduct an interview with a middle school student and ask them some of those questions, because they're really important, because then you will be able to know how a middle school student thinks, but also be able to help you plan for lessons and teaching them to go further and deeper in their reading. So they will have a lot of the same reasons, but their reasons might differ at school versus home. I know with my own kids, they would probably say at school they read because they have to, because they need, they're assigned a book or they're assigned reading in a content area, but they read at home for very different reasons. My son reads some discussion boards because he's interested in a game maybe that they're discussing. My daughter reads up on the latest fashion things and fingernails and all this kind of stuff. So we want to know, is there a way to bridge the gap between in-school and out-of-school literacy practices, because that is a key item in motivation for middle school students. So some of you might be asking, what is the purpose of literacy instruction when middle school students should already know how to read? And I would say that there is a huge difference between decoding and sounding out every letter in a word and actually really comprehending deeply and connecting with things that you read. So we'll find out the differences in those, and a lot of it's through reading strategies. So if you've read the chapter, which I hope you have, you'll know what a reading strategy is. It's really a way to provide adolescents with the tools for making meaning and building new understanding about what they're reading. So it gives them more tools in their toolkit, and that's important, because if kids only know how to decode, and they're never really thinking about how they're understanding their reading, they won't be able to get into the real deep complex text that they're expected to understand in middle school and high school. So we're going to give them some different ways to understand things. So what is the goal of teaching reading strategies? Well, the goal is not learning the strategy itself. I really don't care if a student can tell me the definition of visualizing or the definition of inference. I really care if they can understand how to do it. So our textbook author says the goal is to encourage analytical thinking, making connections, and inferring, and how these provide adolescents with supportive tools that in turn help them learn in all subject areas. So we're giving them tools to help them learn and to more deeply understand. So what do we know about students and what kind of help they need? Well, we know about the students, and we need to model for them. We need to have them apply it with help, apply that strategy with help, and then they need a chance to apply it independently. So we'll talk about the structure of a mini lesson that you will actually do one of them in our class, and we'll talk about the framework of that. You can just disregard this last question. I forgot to take it off, but I will by the time we do this in class. So let's talk about what the 7 key reading strategies are, and actually our author puts in 2 more that aren't always talked about when you talk about reading strategies, but they're very important. So the first one is activating prior knowledge, which I'm not going to go into a lot of depth into all these, just a little bit, because you guys are going to be looking into these in depth. So activating prior knowledge has a lot to do with schema. It really helps because kids need to have something to add on to, a foundational knowledge, so when they learn something new about that, they can then connect with it. If they never have their knowledge activated, if they don't even have prior knowledge, then you'll know where to start. That's a problem. So you need to build up that knowledge. So the next one is deciding what's important in a text. Sometimes we get bogged down in the details, and kids need to know maybe the overarching idea or the theme of the text, and so we need to teach them how to differentiate between main idea and important details. Also, they need to know how to synthesize information. This is really important because one of Bloom's highest levels on the taxonomy is to synthesize, but then create. So if they're going to take a lot of different information from a lot of different resources and put it together to create something new to show their understanding, they need to know how to, again, decide what's important, decide what to leave out, but then know how to categorize information and put like things together. So that's a really high level thinking skill that a lot of middle schoolers lack. They also need to know how to draw inferences during and after reading. In other words, if the author tells them some things but they have to read between the lines, then they need to know how to do that in order to really deeply comprehend those. They also need to know how to self-monitor their comprehension. A lot of kids read and don't even think about what they're reading. They don't stop and think, do I really understand this? Am I having questions about it? What don't I understand? So they might read something, a paragraph, and then not be able to tell you one thing about it because they didn't know that they didn't understand. And so that's all that metacognition and understanding how you think. The next one is how then, if you have faulty comprehension, how do you repair it? We call those fix-up strategies, and we'll talk about several of those. It's important to teach kids to ask questions, and that's not you asking them questions, it's you teaching them how to ask their own. So when I'm reading something and I'm wondering why a character is doing something, I need to be able to say, oops, stop. I'm going to say, why did he just decide to go there instead of there? Or it's really just having that ongoing conversation with the author of the text or even with the character in a text. And again, it goes back to that metacognition and being able to understand when they do and don't understand. The next one is, and this is one of those ones that she added here, building vocabulary, which is very important regarding prior knowledge. Kids might not have a very big vocabulary regarding a certain subject or a certain theme, and it's important for them because if they don't have the vocabulary to read the words and understand, you need to help them build that. And the last one is about developing fluency, and what that is being able to read and decode quickly enough to where you don't struggle with every single syllable. They don't have to worry about the actual decoding process. They need to worry about the comprehension process. And at this point, and actually in class we'll do this, but there's a little link here to our reading strategy presentations because everybody in class will do a little mini lesson on a reading strategy that they sign up for, and we'll talk more about that in class. The other part of this chapter talks about motivating adolescents to read, and in your article reviews, which you've already done, you talked about those 10 instructional approaches in middle school, and those really are all very motivational. So I won't go over those again, but things like freedom and choice and social interaction, active learning, which means they're very involved, collaborating with their peers, making sure that what they're learning and reading is relevant. And that goes on to the next one. One of the reasons that we have to really think about motivating students is because they have increased literacy demands. So it doesn't go down, it goes up as they get older. So we need to make sure that we are choosing or letting them choose things that align with their interests and meeting students where their needs are. If they're a struggling reader, you need to know how to address that, and that really helps those students become successful. And then of course choice is very motivational as well, letting them choose books that they enjoy or choose different kinds of text, whether it be magazines or graphic novels or websites on the internet, discussion boards. There's all kinds of things. Another thing that might actually diminish motivation is if you depend on the textbook for everything that you have the students do, or if you depend on a basal or an anthology in English class. And it's really sometimes hard to get away from that, but it's too restrictive. We need to make sure that kids have options, and inquiry is a really great option to bring in all different kinds of texts to support their learning. One of the other things is about an ever-changing population. Sometimes you have so many different levels in your classroom that you need to, it's hard to differentiate, but you really have got to address those individualized needs. And that is motivational for students because they see that you see them as an individual, you want to get to know them and what their needs are, and then you can help address those. And then another thing that kind of diminishes motivation is that they have, lots of times in middle school, the literacy classes start diminishing in number and in time. And so they might not even have a regular reading class. They might not have a regular, they do have English, and so lots of times that's where reading is addressed. But we need to realize that middle school students are not finished learning. They need more strategies to learn how to read more complex text, and so that's going to be your job. Another, and I kind of said these, the key motivators really: independence, responsibility, choice, they go along with that age group with these students, and then discussion. This is really important. You should have lots of time for talk in the classroom. You do have to set expectations and really adhere to those, but kids need a chance to be heard and to talk about what they're learning and thinking. And that will conclude this video for this chapter. Thank you very much.